records exchange. It says that simple possession of marijuana, rather than considering the juvenile who's charged with marijuana possession or caught with marijuana to be a child in need of services, we change it to label them as a delinquent, which sounds more harsh, but it actually allows for more options for them to be set on the right path. And it makes the records relating to the arrest, criminal charge, or conviction on that civil, on that ticket, not available for public inspection and disclosure. It prohibits employers and educational institutions from requiring an applicant to disclose such information. And finally, the change that was from the first conference report that was in your system yesterday has to do with expungement. It allows for that $25 ticket to be expunged of police and court records to make it clear that individuals who've been acquitted of the civil defense have had that dismissed. Now, right now, you can have that expunged, the criminal charge, and this just brings the civil charge in line with that. So with that, I move that we adopt the conference report.
Thank the Senator. For what purpose, Senator from Hanover, Senator McDougal rise?
Mr. President, speak to the bill.
Senators, the floor.
Mr. President, I know the direction that the bill is moving, but I just want to point out to the body that now the possession of marijuana, the maximum penalty will be $25. But if an individual under the age of 21 possesses tobacco, one cigarette, or vaping device, the penalty is $250. Mr. President, I also point out to the body that if an individual under the age of 21 possesses alcohol, they can be incarcerated up to 1 year, have a $2,500 fine, and 50 hours of community service. Actually, it's a $500 fine or 50 hours of community service. So, Mr. President, in the zeal to work this forward, we have now said that possession of marijuana is less offensive than possession of a cigarette.
For what purpose is the junior senator from Richmond City, Senator Morrissey, rise?
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, would the senator from Alexandria yield for a question?
Senator from Alexandria, yield.
I yield.
Senator Yield, you have the floor.
I would first preface my question with thanking him for all the work that he's done on this. But could he explain to the body what the process is for effectuating an expungement?
Not being an attorney, I can only suppose, and he might answer better than me, that you petition the court in writing and that it's granted by a judge, but I can't confirm that. Maybe you can.
For what purpose, Senator from Franklin County, Senator Stanley, rise?
Mr. President, if I may, if my friend from Alexandria will yield, I think I can answer that question.
Senator
for my
Yield,
friend from Richmond. Mr. President, I'd answer the gentleman by saying, as we know in the expungement statutes are permitted where a person has been charged with a crime, big C or little c, and in doing so then is found not guilty or had it otherwise dismissed is the exact language. The Supreme Court has interpreted that to mean, an eventual dismissal and deferred dismissal does not qualify. A dismissal can be a nolle pros if there is a not guilty entry. There are different ways that you can get a criminal expungement. And then the process is to petition the court for an expungement. We had even, through a bill of mine, had modified the response of the prosecutor where they can file no response to your petition within a certain period of time, waive or agree, and if they do, then there's not even required a hearing anymore. You present an order for the judge in the circuit court to then sign and endorse, and after the period, they basically take the file, they seal it, and they expunge it, and they send on that command to NCIC and the other areas. What this amendment in the new conference report came from the Senator Surivel, who basically said, philosophically, is there an expungement allowed for civil penalties? And the code very specifically says only for criminal penalties. And so in the very rare occasion, Mr. President, I would tell my friend, very rare, I would think, how this is applied. If, let's say, a 22-year-old has a little bit of weed at, Floyd Fest, gets the civil fine. It's $25. He calls me up. He wants me to defend him because he doesn't think it's right. We go in there. I win the case. What this amendment will allow is actually an expungement from the civil charge itself. Remember, an expungement expunges the charge, the disposition and the charge entirely, like as if it never happened. This is now available with the civil penalty if that person challenges in court that civil penalty and is thereafter found not guilty, or it is otherwise dismissed as the code dictates.
Mr. President, with the gentleman from Franklin City yield for one question.
Senator
Of
Yield.
course I will yield.
Senator Yields, you have the floor.
And that was helpful. If you go into court and that gentleman, that 21-year-old, hires you to contest, even though it's a civil penalty and it's not a criminal penalty, and even though the fine is only $25 and not $250, the ultimate expungement, can that be done at that moment with an agreement between the prosecutor that you will be subsequently filing a motion to expunge if within a certain period of time without either you or the defendant having to come back to the court?
Senator, the floor.
Mr. President, I would answer my friend by saying if you paid the fine or if you were found guilty, let's say if they challenged it, that would fall under the outside the otherwise dismissed or acquittal. I have that very case going on right this year, and we tried to, even in the most simplest of arenas where a prosecutor agrees to an expungement after a deferred disposition under 18.2251, that the court should allow that as it was allowed. I now have the Attorney General of Virginia, who's supposed to support decriminalization of marijuana, with one of my clients. We tried the case. It was close. The prosecutor and I just said, why don't we 251, but when he completes it, we'll expunge it. We did all that, did the petition, did the order, everything was fine. And now the Attorney General's down in one of my counties trying to undo that expungement. So in this scenario, if it is, and they're saying because it wasn't otherwise dismissed, under your scenario, if they try the case and lose it, then you're not entitled to the expungement. Not under this, but if you try the case and win it, or it's otherwise dismissed, the civil case, then you're entitled to that expungement. And all it removes is the civil charge itself.
I thank the senator. Speaking very briefly, Mr. President.
Senator, the floor.
Mr. President, again, kudos to the senator from Alexandria, not necessarily his wheelhouse, but spent a lot of time with that learning curve, getting familiar with the process, and we're all better for it. I hope that this is just the beginning of a path where those individuals who previously had minor misdemeanor marijuana convictions and they are still on their record will be able to eventually get those convictions expunged. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank the senator. Question is, shall the Senate adopt the second conference committee report? All in favor of the motion will record their vote aye. Those opposed, no. Are the senators ready to vote? Have all the senators voted? Do any senators desire to change their vote? The clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 27, noes 12.
Ayes 27, noes 12. The Senate adopts the second conference committee report.